The giant trees are towering, blocking the sun. Kui Hung looked at the weeds around him as tall as one person, only to feel that there were 10,000 deer rushing around in his heart. 10 minutes ago, I was still living a fairy life at home playing games and eating takeout. Why did you suddenly travel through such a virgin forest? Although I am an orphan and have nothing to worry about, but the latest sect version of Ghost Valley and 8 Wildernesses has not been played yet. Yuan Shen hasn't even drawn a wife yet. At this moment, he suddenly heard ding. Congratulations! Awakened the almighty cultivation system, dedicated to serve you and your longevity. System. Kui Heng's eyes lit up and he smiled happily. Crossover really comes with golden fingers. Starting point, don't deceive me. It's worth noting that I am a premium VIP who supports genuine subscriptions. System, what merit do you have? Kui Hung was about to inquire about the function of the system, but a red light suddenly flashed in front of him. Alert, alarm! It is detected that this world is a high-level immortal world, with immortal kings everywhere, and countless beasts. Your growth environment is extremely bad. In order to ensure your healthy growth, there is a novice protection benefit to be claimed. Do you want to receive it? A shrill alarm sounded. Kui Hung suddenly looked confused, and then nodded quickly. Receive it, you must receive it. Joke. The time and space of high-level immortals. Immortal kings are everywhere. That is the immortal king. It is an existence that bears Tianyuan and needs to hold the primitive imperial city in one hand, and can be invincible in the world. As a rookie like me, I am afraid I don't even have the qualifications to be cannon fodder in this dangerous world. If there is no novice benefit, it will definitely kill people. Congratulations! Get Novice Protection Benefits *8. Novice Space, an independent small world with absolute defense. It will automatically walk in the gaps of the heavens and the world to avoid being discovered by the powerful, and you will not suffer any harm here. Novice's Cabin, a Three villa with a large garden, with a total area of 1,000 square meters, and comes with refined decoration and a full set of furniture and household appliances, automatic power supply, no power failure. Novice Farm, automatically produce all kinds of crops, and you can produce different grains, vegetables, meat, etc. every day according to your preferences. Novice Wrestler, a junior yellow turban wrestler with weak mana, good at moving heavy objects, scraping putty, washing pots, washing dishes, cooking, etc. New Technique Robes, Taoist robes with weak mana, warm in winter and cool in summer, repelling mosquitoes and dust. You can change the style of clothes at will. Novice Fijian, Fijian with weak mana requires 3 levels of chi refining to activate it. It can be used to chop wood and trees, chop vegetables and fruits. New Quiet Room, a quiet room with weak mana, practicing in it can increase the training speed by 10%. New Immortal Technique, a weak and magical immortal technique that can complete basic cultivation. A series of prompts sounded. Kui Hung only felt that golden light flashed before his eyes, and the surrounding earth shook. At the same time, a layer of golden light curtain was buckled upside down, completely covering this area full of virgin forests, and condensed into a small sun and a small moon hanging in the sky, forming a small independent world. Immediately afterwards, he found that his clothes had also changed, from the original big pants and short sleeves, to a gorgeous robe with colorful light effects on it, which was very cool. There was also a 10-centimeter long pocket knife and a book in the wide sleeve, which should be the Novice Flying Sword and the Novice Immortal Art. Boom! With a loud bang, the 1,000 square meter virgin forest in front was razed to the ground, a Three garden villa was erected in an instant, and a farm not far away was also completed. Boom! A giant strong man with a height of about 3 meters fell from the sky. He was dressed in a strong yellow suit, and respectfully knelt down in front of Kui Hung on one knee, clasped his fists and saluted, "Meet the immortal venerable." In less than 10 seconds, Kui Heng's eyes were turned upside down. Seeing him stunned, he cried out in his heart. However, he soon discovered the annotation introduction of these novice benefits. Note, the above benefits are limited to novices and are valid for 300 years. If you want to continue to own after the novice period, you need to recharge and renew accordingly. The recharge channel will be opened after you pass the novice period. Outrageous! A middle-aged man with glasses and a smiling penguin appeared in front of Kui Heng's eyes. After a while, his heart finally calmed down. Start thinking about your future life. Since we have all crossed into such a dangerous world, cultivating immortals must be cultivated, otherwise, after 300 years, I am afraid that they will die on the spot. The primary goal is to improve their cultivation realm as soon as possible. In 300 years, if you don't talk about becoming an immortal and becoming a Buddha, you should at least cultivate to the point of returning to the emptiness, joining the Tao, etc. If it really doesn't work, you can also transform into a god. If you are in the mortal plane, you should also have a certain ability to protect yourself. Already. So, with the mentality of working hard, Kui Heng walked into the villa. He ignored the refrigerator full of cokes and desserts, as well as the top-off T-line computer, and went straight to the quiet room on the top floor for cultivation. He took out the book New Immortal Techniques from his sleeve and read it carefully. The full name is New Immortal Techniques, From Beginning to Ascension. This is an immortal cultivation method that only has cultivation methods, but does not have any magical powers. A veritable tutorial for beginners. However, although it is only a novice tutorial, it also includes all the cultivation steps of Qi refining, foundation building, Jindan, nascent soul, spirit transformation, void return, Dao, crossing tribulation, and Mahayana. As expected of an advanced Xiangxia time and space, it looks like you have to cultivate to become an immortal before you can complete the novice stage. Kui Heng's heart was very shocked, and he became more and more afraid of the outside world. Fortunately, there is room for newbies, otherwise if I swayed outside, people would blow my breath and make me go to dust. This made him extremely eager to become stronger. So, after 10 minutes of hard practice, he stretched and yawned. www.mentalnovel.com. It seems that there is no need to be so tired on the first day, there are still 300 years. Let's go and see that station first. Top computer. Then he put down the book New Immortal Techniques, From Beginning to Ascension, patted the cover lightly, and said with a smile, "Hee, next time." Pfft! The sound of gas rushing out of the jar resounded in the villa. Kui Heng opened a can of ice-cold Fat House Happy Water, lay down on the ergonomic chair, and skillfully turned on the computer with his feet. Looking forward to it. Win10 system is being updated, 0.11%, 0.12%, 0.121%. Grass. 10 years have passed in a flash. In the process of cultivation, Kui Heng finally understood what it means for people not to think too highly of themselves. 10 years. He has only reached the 6th level of Qi refining. According to this progress, in 300 years, let alone becoming a fairy and becoming a Buddha, after returning to the virtual world, it would be good to be able to form a golden elixir. 300 years later, as an ant of the golden core stage, will I step into this world filled with immortal kings. Kui Heng was filled with endless sorrow and sorrow. He can only recognize the reality clearly, he is not some kind of desolate holy body, innate Taoist body, invincible divine body and other arrogance. Just an ordinary person with ordinary qualifications. So, he continued to maintain a life of getting up early every day, cultivating, collecting vegetables, letting the yellow turban wrestlers cook, eat, play games and drink coke, and cultivate. But one day, when Kui Heng was collecting vegetables on the farm, he suddenly saw a dirty figure falling from the sky. It happened to hit the beef tendon that was just produced today. He was stunned on the spot. What is the situation? Why would someone come in? System. What's going on here? Why would someone come in? Kui Hung called the system in his heart. He panicked. After all, according to the system's previous detection, this world is an advanced Xiangxia time and space. Immortal kings are everywhere, and there are countless beasts. Even a child who only knows how to drink animal milk has the strength of several million kilograms. Although the figure that fell from the sky just now looked like a little boy of 12 or 13 years old, who can guarantee that he does not have earth-shattering power? What if the son of the emperor is pretending to be in the lower realm? No, what about the experience? He is so small that he has only the 6th level of Qi refining, he definitely can't handle it. Hello. The almighty immortal cultivation system will serve you wholeheartedly in your road to longevity. Because the novice spacewalks in the gaps of the heavens and the world, it will often come into contact with different heaven and earth planes, and the spatial rules of some planes are unstable, and there will be a phenomenon of beings falling through the gap and falling into the novice space. Such creatures who accidentally leave the original heaven and earth will be attracted by the return of the original heaven and earth, and they will leave after at most 12 days and return to their original world. It turned out to be so. After Kui Hung heard the system's explanation, he breathed a sigh of relief and felt relieved. Even in high-level Xiangxia time and space, there will definitely be low-level planes, such as the mortal world, the human world, etc. Generally speaking, the space of this low-level plane is mostly unstable. Having read a lot of novels, he is very clear about these doors. Moreover, after relaxing, he realized again that this is a novice space, and he will not suffer any harm here. Even if he were a real boss, it seemed that there would be no problem. After thinking about it, Kui Hang's mood was completely relaxed. He walked into the farm and carefully observed the figure falling from the sky. This is a little boy who looks only 12 or 13 years old. He looks ordinary, with ragged clothes and dark skin. He is thin and skinny. There was a crooked ring scar above his head, and he looked like a little novice. But she has grown a lot of hair. Hungry, so hungry, so hungry. The little boy murmured unconsciously, curled up and trembled slightly. Kui Hung was silent for a while, and sighed, "Who told us to be kind? Let's save your life. Staying here by myself for 10 years is so lonely. It is rare to have someone to speak to. It's not easy either." Hong Fugui opened his eyes with difficulty, then closed them immediately. Because, he saw a ball of light above which was releasing bright white light, and he felt a little dazzling. After a while, he slowly opened his eyes again, and after barely getting used to the light, did he see the surrounding situation clearly. The walls as white as snow, the ingenious decorations, the neat and clean tables and chairs, and the bed on which he is lying, are actually covered with snow-white satin. Where is this place? Hong Fugui was very confused, looking at the big ball of light above. Is this the world after death? Why do you still feel hungry when you die? Squeak! The door was pushed open, and a young man in a snow-white robe walked into the room. He was handsome and elegant, as if he was an exiled immortal. When Hong Fugui saw him approaching, he was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion, "Are you a fairy in the sky?" "I'm just a mortal walking on the road to immortality." Kui Hung smiled and came to Hong Fugui's bedside. "Well, what's wrong?" "No, it's just..." Hong Fugui hurriedly shook his head, but it was at this point that a gurgling sound suddenly sounded in his stomach. "Ha ha ha, are you hungry?" Kui Hung laughed, then looked at the void next to him, and whispered, "Where is the yellow turban warrior?" Yellow turban warrior. Hong Fugui was a little confused and didn't know what Kui Hung was saying to the void, but the scene that appeared in front of him in the next instant made him stunned. I saw that this void was like a lake whose calm was broken by stones, and ripples appeared in circles. Then, a 3-meter tall, muscular man with an extremely strong yellow coat appeared in the room out of thin air, and respectfully knelt in front of Kui Hung on one knee. "Meet the immortal venerable." Sorcery. Fairy. Hong Fuegui looked at Kui Hung in disbelief, his eyes wide open, his mouth wide open, his face full of shock. You also said that you are not an immortal? At this moment, he was so blessed that he fell to his knees with a thud, fell to the ground, and said respectfully, I beg the immortal venerable to give me the way to save the world. Ah, this! Kui Hung suddenly felt numb. I just wanted to ask the yellow turban warrior to bring me something to eat. Why did this kid kneel down suddenly? Sure enough, it came from the mortal plane of the Xiangxia world. So ignorant. Get up and eat something first. Kui Hung raised his hand gently, and Hong Fuegui was directly dragged by invisible mana to stand up. Although he doesn't know any magic, his mana itself has certain magical characteristics, and it is very easy to do things to this level. But in Hong Fuegui's view, this is a genuine immortal method. The air is used to make people stand up. This is the martial arts myth in the legends of the Jianghu, and even the gods of the land can do it. He became more and more certain that his benefactor must be a hidden immortal. However, Hong Fuegui did not continue to kneel and beg Kui Hung. Instead, he listened to Kui Heng's words and waited for dinner. He lost his parents since he was a child. He was deceived and sold to a temple. He became a monk. After he escaped, he wandered for a long time. He was a beggar and he saw too many things in the world. Therefore, he is very clear that when he wants to get something from others, he must not force it wishful thinking. Especially not to use the other party's compassion to persecute. Rather, it should show its own value first. Let's talk about other things. It is best to be submissive before showing your worth. I must not leave a bad impression in Immortal Venerable's heart. Hong Fuegui secretly said in his heart. However, when the yellow turban Lux created a large table of delicious food out of thin air, he couldn't calm down again. Eyeballs stared at the roast chicken, roast duck, sauce beef, etc. on the table, motionless. Poor Hong Fuegui had never eaten a few mouthfuls of meat when he grew up. You got it wrong, this is what I usually eat. Kui Hung rolled his eyes and said to the yellow turban Rishi, bring that bowl of healthy white porridge. Isn't it fun to eat such a big table of meat for people who are dying of starvation? It's the immortal venerable. The yellow turban warrior nodded. Immediately, with a big wave of his hand, he put away the dishes on the table and replaced it with a large pot of fragrant white porridge, accompanied by 2 small bowls of mustard. Hey, eat it! Kui Hung pointed to the white porridge and mustard greens, and said to Hong Fuegui, it's not suitable for you to eat too much meat now, so drink some porridge to support it first. Hong Fuegui was silent at this moment, staring at the white porridge on the table. His eyes were sad, his reaction was bigger than the fish he saw just now, as if he was caught in some kind of memory. Puff! He suddenly knelt on the ground and kowtowed deeply to the bowl of white porridge. His voice was a little hoarse. Father, Mother, the child is not filial, so you didn't drink a bowl of hot white porridge before you died. Hong Fuegui's reaction was beyond Kui Heng's expectations. After some inquiries, he finally understood what was going on. It turned out that Hong Fuegui was born in a remote small mountain village. His parents were both tenant farmers of the landlord. When Hong Fuegui was 8 years old, there was a drought. When he was 9 years old, there was a plague of locusts and plagues. A severe famine spread, and in some places, people could eat each other. In this case, the landlord still refused to reduce the rent, but intensified the oppression, causing Hong Fuegui's parents, 2 older brothers, and a younger sister to starve to death. When Hong Fuegui's parents were about to die, they had hallucinations, and all they whispered in their mouths were, there is porridge to drink, it's an endless white porridge, Fuegier, come and drink it. But they didn't really drink even a mouthful of porridge until they died. Even after he died, he was beaten up by the landlord, and was almost robbed by the hungry people to cook and eat. It was Hong Fuegui carrying a sickle and hacking 3 people to death, and then barely saved the bodies of his parents, siblings, and cremated them for burial. Therefore, when he saw this bowl of fragrant white porridge, he was a little emotional, thinking of his parents, brothers and sisters who passed away. Hearing that, Kui Hung was silent for a long time. After Hong Fugui's mood calmed down, he patted his shoulder lightly and said, "Come on, have some porridge first." Now Hong Fugui's situation is very dangerous, the state of extreme hunger coupled with violent mood swings, it is very likely that he will faint directly. "Thank you Xian, Xianzun." Hong Fugui thanked him personally. He didn't know what to call Kui Hung, so he simply called Xianzun along with the yellow turban warrior. "My surname is Kui, you can call me Mr. Kui." Kui Hung smiled. "Yes, Mr. Kui." Hong Fugui responded quickly, sat at the table at the same time, looked at the bowl of porridge, then looked at Kui Hung, and asked carefully, "Mr. Kui, can I really drink it?" "Drink, you can slow down, don't burn yourself." Kui Hung nodded lightly. "Wow! It's so fragrant. It's so hot." Hong Fugui exclaimed while drinking the porridge. Even if it was hot, he didn't want to stop. After all, in his more than 10 years of life, he had never had a meal as happy as today. Kui Hung didn't stop him, just watched. The rice used for this white porridge is not ordinary, it is the spiritual rice produced in the novice farm. Not only is it full of color and fragrance, but also contains subtle spiritual energy, rich in nutrients but moisturizing and silent, and it will not replenish the excess all at once. Kui Hung had a good impression of Hong Fugui, a poor man who suffered so much. A mere bowl of white porridge, for him, is just a small effort, but it has already brought this poor man unprecedented happiness. Besides, he had spent 10 years in this novice space alone, and if it wasn't for the yellow turbans, he would have almost forgotten how to speak. But the yellow turban Lux is just an obedient robot, and has no real intelligence. Now that a human who can communicate normally has finally come in, of course he wants to make Hong Fugui healthy, even if it is just talking. By the way, you can also learn about the situation in the outside world. Hong Fugui devoured it all. He wiped out the whole big pot of white porridge in less than a minute, and naturally the 2 small bowls of mustard were also killed. His stomach was warm and bulging, this was the happiness he had never felt before. However, Hong Fugui didn't just think about the aftertaste. He hurriedly stood up and wanted to thank Kui Hung, but suddenly found that he seemed to have grown taller. "What's the matter?" He looked down at his hands and feet in astonishment, and found that his palms were much larger, his sleeves were shorter, and his trousers were shorter. He just drank a bowl of porridge, and he actually grew taller, grew up. Moreover, her body seems to be much lighter, and the injuries all over her body have been healed. So this isn't porridge, it's an elixir. Hong Fugui was extremely shocked, looking at Kui Hung with gratitude and indescribable reverence. Such an immortal medicine is so generously given to such a muddy leg. This is definitely a great immortal who saves suffering. Thank you Immortal Venerable for saving your life, and thank you Immortal Venerable for giving me the elixir. Hong Fugui was so excited that he didn't know how to express it, so he knelt down and kowtowed again, and bowed to Kui Hung in a way of thanking the gods and Buddhas. "It's just an ordinary meal." Kui Hung shook his head and smiled, raised his hand to make Hong Fugui stand up, and said, "Don't kneel again in the future, just call Mr. Have you seen the Immortal Venerable at the 6th level of Qi refining?" The yellow turban Lux belonged to the system settings, and it was not a problem if he couldn't change it. He felt guilty when others called him that. "It's a fairy, sir." Hong Fugui nodded quickly, and then asked respectfully, "Sir saved my life and gave me an elixir, my life is yours, sir, if you have any orders, just say it." Instead of seeking the way to save the world, he first focused on repaying Kui Hung's kindness. "Don't you want a way to save the world?" Kui Hung chuckled. "I haven't reported the kindness of Mr. How dare I ask for the holy law?" Hong Fugui shook his head and said. Then talk to me first and play games. Kui Hung raised the corners of his mouth slightly and said with a smile, "Come with me and teach you what PS5 is." Fart Ace Dance. Hong Fugui looked confused, only to think that the immortal's words were really mysterious. For the next 3 days, Kui Hung did not rush to ask Hong Fugui about the situation outside. He brought Hong Fugui to play games, eat, farm, and talk about some things, and he was very relaxed. Compared with the 10 years of living alone, Kui Hung felt that these were the 3 days when he was in the best mood. Under this state of mind, he felt that the bottleneck of his realm that had been stagnant for more than a year was actually loosened. Yes, he was stagnant for more than a year at the 6th level of Qi refining. This is one of the reasons why he recognizes the reality clearly. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Sure enough, you have to stay happy to cultivate immortals. Kui Hung thought in his heart. As for Hong Fugui, the Threa-day experience in Wonderland can be described as mysterious. He has seen too many bizarre and inconceivable treasures of the fairy family. For example, a fairy door lock that can be opened with a single touch without a key. A fairy light that can be switched on and off freely without wax oil, just by saying a word. A fairy jug that can be automatically boiled just by putting water in without ignition. And the most magical fart dance. It is not a dance, but a magic weapon of the fairy family. This magic weapon can display all kinds of scenes on a light curtain, some are terrifying and gloomy, some are wonderful and magnificent, and it seems that there are countless worlds inside. What's even more bizarre is that a little mortal like myself can actually control the creatures of these worlds through this magic weapon. It's unbelievable. I am afraid that only the existence of complete control of these worlds can grant such a great authority to such a small mortal. In just 3 days, in Hong Fugui's heart, Kui Hung has been upgraded from the image of a hidden immortal to a supreme being who controls countless worlds. This morning, Hong Fugui walked out of the room and was about to ask Kui Hung to say hello. But as soon as he went out, he saw the sun and the moon in the sky, shining brightly. I saw streaks of golden clouds flowing in the sky. At this moment, a figure was bathed in the radiance of the sun and the moon and the rays of the sky, slowly ascending to the sky. Kui Hung broke through. 7th level of Qi refining. What kind of feeling does the 7th level of Qi refinement feel like? Kui Hung could clearly feel that his body was more than 10 times stronger than before, and the blood in his body was flowing like a river. It shouldn't be a problem to blow up a 6-story residential building with one punch. Unfortunately, he can't do magic. There is no natural supernatural power, and it is estimated that if you encounter an orthodox immortal cultivator, you will be destroyed on the spot. Thinking of this, Kui Hung's excitement for breaking through the realm immediately cooled down. I'm really blown away, just because I broke through to the 7th level of Qi refining, I felt that I was very powerful. Kui Hung shook his head and warned himself in his heart, this is a high-level world of immortals with immortal kings everywhere, let alone the 7th level of Qi refining. However, the breakthrough in the realm of cultivation was always a good thing, which made him feel a little more relaxed, and finally had the intention to ask Hong Fugui about the situation in the outside world. Although, according to the system, the novice space is now only one of the heavens and myriad worlds contained in this high-level immortal space-time, and it may be just a low-level mortal plane, but it is also of high understanding value. After all, as we all know, the mortals in the Xiangxia world inevitably have countless cultivators, and at least there will be old monsters at the nascent soul level. How could I have the qualifications to look down on the mortal world with such a small Qi-refining 7th layer? What, you said that there are land gods in your place? Kui Hung looked at Hong Fugui with a bewildered expression, almost thinking he had heard it wrong. What about the mortal planes? Why even the gods came out? Oh no, the land gods, that is, haven't really become immortals yet? At this time, Kui Hung was asking Hong Fugui about the outside world. It was fine at first. In Hong Fugui's description, the place where he lived was a dynasty that had flourished for more than 200 years, a violent state machine that used the army to maintain power. But as he talked, Kui Heng felt something was wrong. In addition to the dynasty, there are Buddhism, Taoism, and various sects. In Hong Fugui's description, sects are high above, especially Buddhism and Taoism. They have a long tradition and hold the power of transcendental sanctification, and they don't care about the power of the dynasty. Moreover, it is said that within some ancient sects, there are still land gods who live in seclusion and possess incredible power. They have been watching for a long time, watching the rise and fall of countless dynasties. This is outrageous. Through some of his own experience, Kui Heng quickly clarified the actual situation in the outside world. The place where Hong Fugui lives is indeed a mortal world, and it should be a relatively common world of cultivating immortals. In this kind of world, the sect of immortals is detached from the mortals and controls the life and death of the mortal dynasty. In a sense, the so-called dynasty is just the sect's granary, bank, and admissions office. Those land gods are estimated to be immortal cultivators with a high level of cultivation, perhaps foundation building, or jindan. Although this is much safer than the high-level world of the immortal king, but the safety factor is also very limited. As a little rookie with the 7th level of chi refining, there is no scum that will die if he encounters a foundation. After all, there is another name for the common world of immortal cultivation, and that is underworld cultivation world. Hong Fugui felt a little puzzled. Why is Mr. Kui so excited when he hears the land gods? For such a supreme being who controls countless worlds, even a land is no different from an ant. Sir, is there any problem with the land fairy? Hong Fugui asked in confusion. Cough. Kui Heng coughed twice and asked, do you know what abilities those land gods have? Skills? Hong Fugui thought for a while, then shook his head and said, the land gods are characters that transcend the mundane. I am just a little beggar and cannot reach that level. However, I've been wandering everywhere, and I've heard some rumors that all these land gods can pick stars and catch the moon, carry mountains and seas, and are amazing gods. This is what he heard from Mr. Pingshu in the tea house. I see. Kui Heng nodded when he heard the words, as if he was lost in thought. In fact, his whole person is not well now. Co-author, this is still a relatively high-level mortal world, and it even has the power to pick stars and catch the moon, and carry mountains and seas. Dangerous. Looking at Kui Heng's thoughtful expression, Hong Fugui suddenly realized something in his heart. I know, a supreme being like Mr. Kui must have transcended the mundane for too long and don't know much about human affairs. The reason why you asked me about the gods on the land is probably because I just want to know the situation in the mortal world, so that I can think about the profound truth of the fairy family through these situations in the mortal world. It's as if I sometimes pay attention to ants moving and think about the reason. This made Hong Fugui a little excited. He felt that he had finally found his worth. Only by showing one's own value can one hope to ask Mr. Kui for the way to save the world. Hong Fugui was only a 12-year-old child after all. Again, he wanted to show his worth. So, for the next 3 days, he said almost everything he knew and said, and he told Kui Heng all the things he had seen and heard in the past. However, due to his own identity, perspective and sources of information, Kui Heng had a million little misunderstandings. Under the unreserved description of Hong Fugui, a world of underworld immortal cultivation gradually took shape in Kui Heng's heart, and he learned about the details of that dynasty. Although this dynasty is a subordinate force of the Xiaoxian sect, it still seems to be unable to escape the regularity of the cycle. Kuazuo has just passed 300 years, and the land acquisition has been extremely serious, disaster victims are everywhere, and a doomsday scene. And the practice of the Xiaoxianman party to sit idly by and let the dynasty go into chaos is also in line with Kui Heng's understanding of the underworld Xiaoxian world. It's so miserable to live in such a world. Kui Heng patted Hong Fugui's shoulder with pity. It's too hard. The dynasty is only the subordinates of the sect, and the people are naturally just the lambs shepherds by the sect. No one cares about the life and death of livestock. Even if he joins a sect later on, successfully cultivates immortals, and leaves the ranks of lambs, he will have to face the more cruel underworld immortal cultivation world. One word. Awful. Sir. Hong Fugui suddenly spoke up and saluted Kui Hung respectfully. Sir, over the years, I have wandered around, traveled to many places, and seen too many miserable sights. Countless people like me have been displaced, countless people like my parents, brothers and sisters have been starved to death, or even eaten. The court doesn't care about us. www.mtlnovel.com. The gods don't care about us, no one saves us. I want to change all of this, I want to let these people like me live a good life, but I don't know what to do. Hong Fugui is bold, please give me the way to save the world. Kui Hung was silent for a while, then said, do you want to change the dynasty? Change the dynasty. Hong Fugui was stunned and a little confused when he heard the words, and finally nodded solemnly, yes, that's right. I want to change the dynasty, change the world, and build a new era where everyone can have enough to eat. His eyes seemed to be shining, and the last sentence was almost shouted. Do you really want to do this? Kui Hung frowned and said solemnly, this road is destined to be bumpy, and there may even be no burial. Rebel in a world of underworld cultivators and establish a new dynasty. The level of difficulty can be imagined. After getting along for the past few days, Hong Fugui gave him a very good impression, and it was a realm that helped him break through. He didn't want the child to end up miserably. Ask Sir for permission. Hong Fugui's eyes were still firm. If you are willing to live in peace, I can keep you rich and noble for the rest of your life. Kui Hung stood with his hands behind his back, and said lightly, but if you go that way, you can only ask for good fortune. Don't you regret it? No regrets. Hong Fugui's eyes were as firm as a rock. Ah! Kui Hung shook his head and sighed, looking very disappointed. He walked over and hit Hong Fugui on the head 3 times, then walked into the room with his hands behind his back, and closed the front door directly. Hong Fugui stood there in a daze, stood for a while before regaining his senses, and bowed his head respectfully. Thank you, Mr. He had already guessed what Kui Hung meant. At 3 in the middle of the night, Hong Fugui entered the villa from the back door, and happened to see Kui Hung sitting on a chair in front with his back to him. He didn't dare to speak out directly, he just knelt there and waited quietly. After a while, Kui Hengke shook his head gently and sighed, since you have realized it, I will teach you some methods. Hong Fugui was overjoyed when he heard the words, and hurriedly said, thank you sir. Kui Hung stood up, put his hands behind his back, and said, come with me to the study. He didn't really want Hong Fugui to go that way. But Hong Fugui persisted. So he used to stalk from journey to the west. If Hong Fugui can't understand the meaning, then don't mention the law of salvation after that. If Hong Fugui can realize it, it is God's will. As for what to teach, he has already thought about it. In terms of rebellion, in terms of changing the world, and in terms of feeding ordinary people, who can compare to that great ancestor? In the library. Who is the enemy and who is the friend? This is the first question you have to figure out. Kui Hengze turned his back to Hong Fugui and said lightly, if you want everyone to have enough to eat, you must first ensure that everyone has fields. So where did fields come from? This is also a question you need to think about. He is now dictating some basic concepts to Hong Fugui, and first establishes the foundation of his thoughts. After breaking through to the 7th level of Qi refining, not only did his strength become stronger, but his spirit also became stronger. My thinking has become extremely clear, and my memory is even stronger. I can recall all the books I read when I was on Earth. Of course, the theory taught to Hong Fugui cannot be copied completely. After all, the world context is very different. Certain revisions are required to seek truth from facts. Kui Heng intends to compile these revised theories into a pamphlet and give it to Hong Fugui for him to study slowly after he leaves here. The name is Datuang Ji. Datuang in the world. Hong Fugui stood aside and listened to Kui Heng's oral theory, and a storm had already set off in his heart. The ideas and insights contained in these theories were things he had never thought of, and he had never heard of before. It made him feel like he could see the sun through the clouds, as if it was a light that pierced through the endless darkness. So amazing! Mr. Kui is really amazing. Now, the shock he feels in his heart is even more than learning that Kui Heng is a great being who controls many worlds. However, Hong Fugui is still young, has limited knowledge, and does not read much. For him, the basic theories taught by Kui Heng are still difficult to understand. Therefore, he often scratches his head in a hurry, wanting to ask. When Kui Heng said that he would compile these theories into a booklet, Hong Fugui almost jumped up with joy. For the next 5 days, Kui Heng was talking about this dragon-slaying technique. At the same time, he is also compiling Datuang Ji. It's a sunny day. Kui Heng prepared 3 gifts for Hong Fugui, who was about to leave. Anyone who accidentally falls into the novice space through the space gap will be attracted by the power of the original world, and will return in at most 12 days. Therefore, today is the last day for Hong Fugui to stay here. Looking at the 3 gifts Kui Heng put in front of him, Hong Fugui couldn't help but feel a little dazed. Time runs fast. During these 12 days, I strayed into this paradise, met the immortal venerable, experienced a life that I never dared to imagine before, and even obtained the method of salvation that I dreamed of. Like a dream. And now, this dream is about to wake up. I will face the miserable apocalypse outside again, and I must face it too. The outside world is waiting for you to change. Thank you, Mr. Hong. Hong Fugui bowed respectfully. If you can live well and end your life, thank me. Kui Heng waved his hand and pointed to the 3 things on the table next to him. These things will be helpful if you put them away. These 3 items are the Datuang collection, a small bundle of stems and seedlings, and a fine iron long sword. Yes, sir. Hong Fugui carefully put away the Datuang collection, looked at the sweet potato stems, and asked in doubt, Sir, what is this? It is a sweet potato seedling. After planting, it can yield 10,000 caddies of grain per mu. Kui Heng said with a smile. This is an improved version of the sweet potato seedling from Novice Farm, which will not rot before planting. The yield per mu is 10,000, and the grain is 10,000 caddies. When Hong Fugui heard the words, his eyes widened and his face was full of disbelief. If it wasn't from Kui Heng's mouth, he wouldn't even believe it. How could there be such a crop of crops in the world? This is definitely fairy food. If you can really gain power, you can plant these stems and seedlings, and then you will know. Kui Heng picked up the long sword again, and said, This is a self-defense thing I gave you, and it contains some of my magic power. You can use it 9 times. Although the level of mana contained in the sword is only the 7th level of Qi refining, which is of no use to advanced immortal cultivators, but Hong Fugui wants to change the dynasty, he can only focus on the struggle of the mortal dynasty, and it is impossible to fight immortal cultivators hidden. Therefore, this sword should be enough. Thank you first. Hong Fugui was extremely grateful to Kui Heng, and wanted to salute and thank him, but was stopped by Kui Heng's magic. It is the best thank you to live well until the end of your life. Kui Heng smiled. You reading www.uuganshu.com? Yes. Sir. Hong Fugui nodded solemnly. 12 days have passed. Kui Heng saw an incomparably strong golden light on Hong Fugui's body, and he disappeared into this novice space with him out of thin air. This is the power of the laws of the world. With Kui Heng's current state of cultivation, it is completely incomprehensible. He stood there for a while, looked up at the sky, then at the novice hut not far away, and finally shook his head and chuckled. I'm alone again. 20 years later. Kui Heng's cultivation realm broke through to the 9th level of qi refining. Compared to those geniuses, this cultivation speed is simply horribly slow. In many immortal novels, it is not even qualified to be a cannon fodder who is beaten in the face by the protagonist. However, now Kui Heng has long been accustomed to this state of cultivation, and is no longer as impatient as when he first started. Step by step, steady cultivation is not bad. 30 years later, he successfully built the Dao foundation and stepped into the realm of foundation building step by step. After another 40 years, he completed the cultivation in the initial stage of foundation establishment, preparing to break through the middle stage of foundation establishment. Time flies. Kui Heng has traveled through the present for 100 years. It has been 90 years since Hong Fugui entered this place by mistake. On this day, Kui Heng came to the novice farm again to collect vegetables. When he got a piece of beef tendon, he opened his mouth, which he hadn't said a word in 30 years, and laughed lightly. Many years have passed, and I don't know if that kid has fulfilled his aspirations, and has he died. At this moment, the sky, which had not changed for 90 years, suddenly had ripples again. Ah ah ah! A scream of vitality came from the sky, and a petite figure passed through the ripples in the sky and quickly fell down. The person who fell in this time is very energetic. Kui Heng laughed when he heard the voice. Immediately, he raised his hand slightly and pushed the airflow with force, holding the figure that fell from the sky in the air, preventing her from falling directly. This isn't a spell, it's a little magic trick that he has figured out over the past 100 years. For immortal cultivators in the foundation building stage, mana is no longer just the energy stored in the body, but it has completely become a part of his own body. Therefore, although he doesn't know how to turn this part into spells like water, fire, wind, and thunder, it is not a problem to develop some special usages. Under the support of Kui Heng's mana, this new visitor from heaven slowly descended. This is a very beautiful little girl, about 13 or 14 years old, with fair and tender skin, soft lines on her face, and extremely delicate facial features, like a doll carved from pink and jade. Her clothes are not ordinary. She is wearing a moon-white satin dress with golden patterns embroidered on it. The workmanship is very exquisite. She wears jade hair accessories inlaid with gold on her head, and a slender waistband. A warm jade pendant. It can be said that it is silk and satin, with gold, silver and jade in it. This outfit alone is enough to save Hong Fugui for the rest of his life, but he still can't save it. This should be a rich lady. Oh no, she was too young, not too old, so Kui Heng looked at the little girl again. For now, I can only call you Miss. Kui Heng planned to go over to say hello, but he didn't know what to say when he opened his mouth. He secretly said, such a little girl suddenly came to a strange place. Wouldn't she be very scared to see me as a stranger? But at this moment, the little girl trotted over, her big eyes flickered, she looked at Kui Heng with great curiosity, and said happily, "Brother, you are amazing, are you an immortal?" He doesn't seem to be afraid of life at all. I'm just... Kui Heng was about to explain the same as when he met Hong Fugui before. You must be an immortal, right? Brother. The little girl seemed to have already recognized this. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and her eyes were full of admiration. Before Kui Heng could finish explaining, she asked, "Can I call you a fairy brother?" "Oh, call me Mr. Kui." Kui Heng tried to correct. "Okay, brother Shen Xian." The little girl said with a smile, "You're so old when you call him Mr. You look so young, you're not a few years older than me, so it's better to be called brother Shen Xian, right?" Now Kui Heng looks like he is 18 or 19 years old. "It's not impossible," Kui Heng said helplessly. Since he hasn't communicated with anyone in the past 90 years, and he hasn't even said a word in the past 30 years, his social skills have deteriorated sharply. This little girl's self-familiar appearance made him unable to straighten him directly. Pure social cattle disease belongs to yes. Okay. Brother Immortal, is this your immortal mansion? The little girl cheered and looked around at the same time. She looked left and right, looking like a curious baby, then looked at Kui Hung innocently. Did you bring me here? No. Kui Hung shook his head gently, narrowed his eyes slightly, and said with a smile, you came here because of chance, and you don't have to be afraid. You will return to your original world in 12 days at most. This little girl is not as innocent as she seems on the surface. 12 days. A trace of unnaturalness flashed in the little girl's eyes, and the smile on her face froze slightly, but she quickly returned to her natural state, and she seemed a little dejected. Why is it only 12 days, Brother Immortal? Can you let me stay in this immortal mansion for a while? After 12 days, you will naturally know. Kui Hung said with a smile. After all, he was a monk in the Foundation establishment period, with a quick mind, and he quickly became familiar with normal social conversations. That's it. The little girl looked like she was suddenly enlightened, and tilted her little head slightly, looking very cute. However, her voice was a little lower than before, and she didn't seem to know what to say next, but she quickly opened the conversation again. My name is Zhang Kikai, Immortal Brother, what is your name? Kui Hung, Eternal Hung. Kui Hung was not shy about his name, so he said it directly, so that the little girl could feel more at ease. Brother God's names are so immortal. Zhang Kikai said with a smile on his face, are the gods all eternal? This little girl came from the Kwa group. Kui Hung couldn't help complaining in his heart, but he still had a smile on his face. I'm just an ordinary person. Brother Shen Xian, someone like you, Zhang Kikai was about to continue her exaggeration, but a sudden sound in her stomach interrupted her. Guru. She is hungry. Because she was so addicted to martial arts, she fell into this novice space before she had time to eat lunch. Haha, let's go and have something to eat with me. Kui Hung laughed. A hint of hesitation flashed in Zhang Kikai's eyes, but he quickly made a decision, nodded, and said sweetly, well, thank you, Brother Immortal. Kui Hung took the little girl to the door of the novice's cottage, and gently pressed his finger on the fingerprint handle. Hearing a smooth unlocking sound, the door opened by itself. Wow! It's amazing! Zhang Kikai's shining eyes widened, and she said with incomparable admiration, is this the house where Brother Shen Xian lives? It's really amazing. Kui Hung was a little embarrassed to hear it. He didn't say anything and walked in directly. But Zhang Kikai didn't follow. She stood at the door and seemed a little nervous. She looked at Kui Hung and asked in a low voice, can I really go in directly? I'm just a mortal. Come in and have something to eat. Kui Hung couldn't help laughing. Okay. Zhang Kikai clenched her small fists, slightly puffed out her small chest, and stepped in. But at this moment, the intelligent elf detected that someone other than Kui Hung had entered the room, and immediately started the voice to say hello, hello. Welcome. Distinguished guest. Ah! Zhang Kikai exclaimed, obviously taken aback by the prominent voice. It really jumped up. His head almost hit the ceiling. This, what is it? Zhang Kikai looked around in surprise, but found that there was no third person. It's the house that's talking, don't worry about it. Kui Hung said with a smile. He couldn't explain to this little girl what artificial intelligence is and what smart appliances are. Having not communicated with people for decades not only reduced his social skills, but also reduced his desire to speak. This is it, Fairy, Brother Xian's house is really amazing. Zhang Kikai's heart was actually even more shocked. www.mtlnovel.com. The house can actually speak. Could it be that this is really the place where the gods live, and this young man who is not a few years older than himself is really a who has lived for a long time? You go and sit at the table over there. Kui Hung pointed to the direction of the restaurant and said, "I will cook 2 bowls of noodles." Because of Hong Fugui's previous experience, Kui Hung didn't directly call the Yellow Turban Warrior over this time. And while Kui Hung was cooking the noodles, the little girl fell into a dazed state again. How to boil water and cook noodles without fire? How can water be boiled without fire? Why does the smoke rush upwards by itself, but it doesn't float around? Many situations made her feel difficult to understand. Is this person really a fairy? But she didn't dare to ask too much. After eating the noodles, Kui Hung did not continue talking to Zhang Kekai, nor did he ask urgently. Instead, he took her to the 2nd floor and pointed to a bedroom for her to rest. Then he went back to the training room on the 3rd floor. To make a little girl of this age feel at ease, the best way is to do nothing first. In the bedroom on the 2nd floor of the novice cottage, the door of the room was firmly held up by the table and chairs, the windows were locked, the curtains were drawn, and the room was dark. At this time, Zhang Kekai was sitting curled up at the foot of the bed, hugging her legs, her long black hair was loose, and she buried her face. Her petite body couldn't help shaking, and she whimpered from time to time. The lively and cheerful look that he used to get along with Kui Hung was not at all in the slightest. "Mom and Dad, where are you? I'm so scared." A 14-year-old girl. 4-foot is still practicing martial arts in his own courtyard, and he can smell the fragrance of his mother's cooking. The next moment, he appears in another place, or even another world, out of thin air. What will be the reaction? Of course, fear, confusion, and other emotions are intertwined. If it were an ordinary little girl, she would have been frightened on the spot. But Zhang Kekai is different. She was very intelligent since childhood and was a child prodigy famous throughout the county. At the age of 14, he was already helping the family with the business and was in charge of a shop by himself. If it weren't for the fact that she was frail and sick since she was a child, and she was a girl, she would have even surpassed her father and completely controlled the family's business. Even so, she managed the shop she was in charge of to become the most prosperous one in her family. Far more than his 6 brothers. Therefore, Zhang Kekai is extremely adaptable to emergencies. When she found that she suddenly came to a strange place and faced a stranger, she immediately thought of a way to deal with it. In such a weak situation, it is best not to let the other party feel the fear in their hearts. If you show fear, it will easily stimulate the other party's emotions, increase the other party's psychological advantage, and become more unscrupulous. This will undoubtedly speed up the speed at which you are hurt. Of course, don't offend the other party by speaking. So, she started all kinds of exaggerated behaviors. This one is good, that one is great. In short, as long as it is related to Kui Hung, she will praise it a lot. And after the chatter box was opened, it was said one after another. The purpose is to let the other person's thinking follow his own. From Zhang Kekai's point of view, with Kui Heng's great supernatural ability that he could transfer himself here out of thin air, he would definitely be impossible to resist. The best way is to win the favor of the other party. Try to avoid being hurt as much as possible. The worst thing you can do is to delay it for a while. At the same time, she was also inquiring about Kui Heng's information, trying to save himself. But Zhang Kekai soon found out that Kui Hung didn't seem to like her words. Not only did he fail to guide his thinking, he didn't even ask for any valuable information. Instead, he was so shocked by this magical house that he almost couldn't hide his inner fear. What happened next was beyond her expectations. After eating, Kui Hung put her in a bedroom, but left without doing anything. She couldn't figure out what this weird and wonderful person wanted to do. I don't even know why I came here by myself. All these emotions finally converged into fear. Especially in a bedroom where she was alone, it aggravated the emotional fluctuations. So it became what it is now. After a long time. Only then did Zhang Kekai slowly raise her head, her big, shining eyes were now red and swollen from crying. She got up and got out of bed, opened the curtains, but found that the moon was hanging high outside. The dark night sky is like ink, without the twinkling of stars, it looks endlessly vast. In the center of this vast night sky, the bright silvery white moonlight shines through the window and reflects on her delicate face. Such a night scene caused a subtle change in Zhang Kekai's mood. Thinking back to Kui Heng's appearance during the day, she suddenly burst into tears. Perhaps, this fairy brother is not a bad person. Whether it was self-comforting or finding a way for herself in desperation, her mood finally relaxed a lot, followed by a strong feeling of exhaustion and trance. Boom! Zhang Kekai suddenly staggered 2 steps to the side. She hurriedly held down the windowsill. This didn't make him fall. But her breathing became rapid, an unnatural flush appeared on her pretty face, her petite body trembled uncontrollably, and her little feet tensed. No, I'm not at home today, I didn't take medicine. Zhang Kekai's consciousness began to blur. She has been frail and sick since she was a child, and needs to drink decoction every day to recuperate her body. And as long as there are any violent fluctuations in the mood, it is easy to get sick, and it will directly pass out, and even the pulse will become extremely weak, like a dying person. Over the years, on the one hand, she has relied on practicing martial arts to reconcile her mood and stabilize her emotions. On the other hand, the decoction she takes every day also has the effect of relieving this disease. Today, her mood swings were unprecedentedly violent, and she didn't take any medicine. As soon as her condition relapsed, it immediately aggravated. Mom and Dad, am I going to die? Zhang Kekai was extremely sad and helpless, and has gradually entered a semi-conscious state. At this moment, she suddenly felt a warm current rising from her lower abdomen, and in a blink of an eye, it traveled all over her limbs, making her suddenly feel like she was taking a medicinal bath. After a while, Zhang Kekai woke up and was surprised to find that he did not pass out on the ground, nor did his condition worsen, and even felt that his body was much lighter and his condition was better than ever. It seems that the symptoms that have plagued him for more than 10 years have completely disappeared without a trace. Amazing! Is it because of the bowl of noodles I ate earlier? Thinking back on how she felt just now, she could confirm that it was the warm current that saved her, which made her feel a deep sense of guilt. That bowl of noodles was cooked for me by the immortal brother. I am afraid that he has already seen my physical problems, so he cooked noodles for me to eat and cured my illness. The origin of my illness is unknown. My father and mother searched for famous doctors and famous medicines and couldn't find a cure. Now it's cured with just a bowl of noodles. What a fairy! Now, the guard in her heart has dropped a lot. After all, if such an immortal almighty has any malicious intentions, his little thought is useless at all. Moreover, this immortal also cured his own disease, so he should be a good person. If that's the case, maybe it's true that I'll go back in 12 days. Zhang Kekai had another expectation in her heart, and at the same time, her sense of guilt became stronger, and she felt more and more that she used the heart of a villain to take care of a gentleman's belly. No, it should be with the heart of a little girl, and she corrected herself. Tomorrow morning, I'll go to Brother Shenxian to apologize. Zhang Kekai made up his mind and finally calmed down his emotions completely. After adjusting her emotions, she felt that the bed and quilt here were soft and comfortable, and it didn't take long for her to fall asleep. In fact, Kui Heng did not deliberately use noodles to treat Zhang Kekai's illness. He really just cooked 2 bowls of noodles to eat. Originally, that time was also the time for him to eat. At most, he ordered more noodles. The only special thing is that the noodles come from the novice farm, which contains subtle spiritual energy and nourishes the human body. For a foundation-building cultivator like Kui Heng, that bit of spiritual energy can be said to be insignificant, almost nothing. But for someone like Zhang Kekai, who has been frail and sick since childhood, it is a life-saving medicine. Even if it doesn't make her body fully recover, it's enough to eliminate the pain of several illnesses. Kui Hung spent the night in the training room. Although the novice quiet room has a 10% training bonus, it is not very useful. Now that the cultivation in the early stage of foundation building has been completely completed, continuing to cultivate can only increase some weak mana. It can't play any role in breaking through the initial stage of foundation building. The problem I can feel now is that the mana is not flexible enough, and it will only follow the exercises step by step, which makes Daiji like a pool of stagnant water, difficult to activate, and naturally difficult to break through and become stronger. Although I have developed some simple ways to operate mana myself, I can only make mana a little more flexible, and the effect is limited. It would be nice if I could use spells, or some other means of changing the way the mana works, maybe it could make Daiji more flexible. Kui Hung is summarizing his cultivation experience and thinking about ways to break through the realm. Beginner Immortal Techniques, From Beginner to Ascension is indeed a novice tutorial. It really only has training content, and there is no such thing as spells. This kind of thinking has been going on for a long time, and I have no clue. Same thing tonight. Kui Henko sat down until dawn and still had no idea. He walked out of the quiet room as usual, planning to go to the novice farm to get some food for breakfast. But as soon as I got downstairs, I saw that innocent and beautiful little girl standing pretty at the entrance of the stairs. He seemed to be waiting for him. Brother Immortal. Zhang Kikai's eyes lit up when he saw Kui Hung go downstairs, trotted over, took a deep breath, and bowed his body like the Jianghe people he had seen before, respectfully said, "Please forgive the little girl. It was rude yesterday." Kui Hung was stunned for a moment, then chuckled, "What are you doing?" www.mtlnovel.com I am, that, yesterday I regarded you as a bad person. Zhang Kikai scratched the back of his head a little embarrassedly, "My mother said that girls should be more vigilant." Haha, so that's right. Kui Hung actually saw her little thought yesterday, but he didn't say it. Then am I a bad person? You are a good person. Zhang Kikai said very seriously. However, just after she finished speaking, she shook her head again and corrected her solemnly, "No, you are a good fairy brother." "Then I'll still be a fairy brother," Kui Hung said with a hearty smile, politely rejecting a good person card. "Brother fairy, in order to express my apology, how about I perform a sword dance for you?" Zhang Kikai seemed to think that just verbal apology was not sincere enough, and added, "This is a sword technique for health preservation that was taught to me by an old Taoist priest. It can not only be used to maintain health and prolong life, but it is also very beautiful to dance." She thought for a long time last night about how she should apologize. It's just that a verbal apology is too thin. But he found that he didn't seem to have any special ability, so he couldn't help the fairy brother in business. In the end, after thinking about it, it seems that only Jianwu is the only one. The sword dance is not. Kui Hung subconsciously wanted to refuse, letting a 14-year-old girl perform the sword dance. There was always a sense of guilt for squeezing child labor. Although Zhang Kikai was naturally beautiful, and her appearance and figure had grown a bit, in his eyes she was still just a little girl. However, before he finished speaking, a flash of light flashed in his heart, and he suddenly asked Zhang Kikai, "You said just now that this sword dance is actually a health-preserving sword technique, can it be regarded as a kind of martial arts?" Although Kui Hung still doesn't know what kind of world Zhang Kikai came from, as a post-90s generation in China, his feelings for martial arts are indelible. After traveling through immortal cultivation, he also tried to restore the martial arts in his impression with magic power, but after trying for decades, he stayed at the level of posing. As for the inner strength and heart method that needs to be coordinated, there is absolutely no clue about the running route of the meridians. Of course, as an immortal cultivator, Kui Hung has a meticulous understanding of his own body, and he can let his mana flow in his body at will, but the fact that he developed martial arts out of thin air is two concepts. If every root of mana running in the body is compared to a number, then these numbers may exist in thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands or even more. Wanting to create a martial art out of thin air without any theoretical basis is like arranging and combining these numbers randomly. The difficulty is too high. However, Zhang Kekai's words just now gave him inspiration. Since there are ready-made martial arts, can he look at it for reference? It seems feasible. What if martial arts can also make mana more flexible and further activate Daiji? This is a big gain. After hearing this, Zhang Kekai was a little puzzled, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Yes, it's a martial art. Is there any problem, brother immortal? I'm a little curious about the world you come from." Kui Heng smiled and said, "There are no years in the mountains, and I don't know about the world. You can put the sword dance first, why don't you tell me about the outside world?" He also wanted to confirm whether Zhang Kekai came from Hong Fugui's world. Although the novice space is wandering in the gaps of the heavens and the world, it is unlikely that every person who falls in is from the same world, but it is always right to know more about the situation. As for martial arts, there is no need to rush for a while. The little girl still needs to be guided step by step. There are no years in the mountains, and I don't know about human affairs. Zhang Kekai whispered these words in her heart, only to feel that Kui Heng felt a kind of detachment above the ordinary, sitting and watching the passage of time. Is this the temperament of a fairy, the life of a fairy? She couldn't help sighing in her heart, this immortal brother should be very powerful even among immortals. Does this count as meeting an immortal? Then brother immortal, what do you want to know? Zhang Kekai asked. The little girl needs a conversation. After all, the proposition of things outside is too broad, and I don't know where to start. Let's start with yourself and the things around you, and spread out little by little. Kui Heng smiled and said, "By the way, there is also the old Taoist priest who taught you martial arts." He wanted to confirm the strength level of this old Taoist priest. After all, even in ordinary human planes, it is possible for tyrannical cultivators to appear. Myself. Zhang Kekai was stunned for a moment, and after thinking for a while, he began to tell, "My family is in Viang County, Hedong County. My ancestors have been in the fabric business for generations, and I have 6 brothers." Kui Heng listened quietly from the side. According to Kui Heng, the world Zhang Kekai lives in is a feudal dynasty that implements the county system. And her family is a wealthy businessman with a small fortune in the county. At first, what she described was basically the local customs of Viang County. After finishing the local affairs, she talked about the situation in the surrounding counties. But she obviously didn't know much about other counties, so she couldn't tell much. And many of them are just heard. In the end, after she finished talking about some of the county towns she had heard of, she basically finished talking about the whole world she knew. In fact, this is the whole world she knows. Kui Heng asked her about the overall situation of the country, but learned that she only knew that the country's name was Dajin, and she didn't even know the emperor's era. In fact, this is also quite normal. In ancient times when the productive forces were underdeveloped, the world in the eyes of many ordinary people was just the place around them. As for things further afield, and even the emperor of the country, it can be said that it has nothing to do with them. Might as well memorize the county magistrate's name and preferences. Zhang Kekai, a 14-year-old girl, can know so many things, she can be regarded as erudite. Of course, this also has something to do with her being in charge of her own business. If it weren't for the fact that there was a special group in the information Zhang Kekai described, Kui Heng would have thought that this time he had come to an ancient world without any extraordinary elements. That is the martial arts people. This made Kui Heng confirm that Zhang Kekai and Hong Fugui did not come from the same world. Because in Zhang Kekai's description, there are no high-level land gods, only martial arts people who walk in all directions and roam the rivers and lakes. These martial arts practitioners will all practice martial arts, and they have powers that are far superior to those of ordinary people. Zhang Kekai was obviously very interested in these martial arts people, and told Kui Heng many martial arts stories, even the most famous martial arts schools. There is an irresistible yearning in the words. The old Daoist who taught her the swordsmanship of health preservation looked like an immortal, and she guessed that it should be a senior who came from the Daiyi Temple, the largest school of martial arts. This information allows Kui Heng to roughly confirm that most of the world that this novice space travels to is a martial arts plane. The power level is estimated to be far behind the world that Hong Fugui said. It's a pity that Zhang Kekai has never seen martial arts masters fighting, only some ordinary people fighting in the arena. He is not very clear about the specific strength level of these martial arts people, and most of them are just hearsay. Otherwise, Kui Heng can roughly estimate the strength level of this martial arts. However, according to his guess, no matter how high a martial arts world is, it is not very high. Unless it is a world of fantasy and martial arts. In the Xiangxia time and space where the fairy kings are everywhere, there is still such a weak world. Kui Heng couldn't help but be amazed, and said in his heart, "It's true that there are all kinds of wonders in the heavens and the world. It would be nice if I faced this kind of world after I walked out of the novice space 200 years later. Simply beautiful. Brother Shenxian, do you still want to watch the sword dance?" At this moment, Zhang Kekai's soft and delicate voice came. "Let's dance." Kui Heng came back to his senses and smiled, "If you have any luck, you can read it out." "Brother Shenxian, is this going to teach me martial arts?" Zhang Kekai's eyes lit up, and he was extremely excited, and immediately nodded, "Okay." Although she has a wealthy family, she has longed for a life of roaming the rivers and lakes since she was a child, hoeing the strong and helping the weak, and dreaming of becoming a generation of chivalrous women, but all of this requires strong martial arts skills. If it was the immortal elder brother who instructed him in martial arts, he would definitely be able to make his own progress by leaps and bounds. If he could learn a little bit of magic tricks, wouldn't he want to become number one in the world and dominate the martial arts? Thinking of this, she immediately felt full of motivation. Zhang Kekai's figure is very good. Although he is only 14 years old, he has already opened up a lot. He should be over 1 meter 65 in height, and the proportions are also excellent. Such girls dancing with swords can be described as pleasing to the eye. Kui Heng looked very intently. Of course, his attention was focused on this sword dance move. After Zhang Kekai danced, Kui Heng had already mastered this set of swordsmanship and thought of many derivative moves. However, the most important achievement for him was the luck that Zhang Kekai dictated when he danced his sword. This gave him a lot of inspiration. "Brother Fairy, how is it?" Zhang Kekai trotted in front of Kui Heng with flickering eyes. He has just danced a set of swordsmanship now, his breath is a little short, and his little face is red and very cute. "Well, it's not bad." Kui Heng nodded and smiled. He didn't know whether he was talking about swordsmanship or people. "Okay." Zhang Kekai was immediately pleasantly surprised, is he going to see the immortal make a sword? Kui Heng took the long sword and waved it slowly. At the same time, he is also mobilizing his mana according to the luck of the swordsmanship. In fact, he did not have any hope for the power of this set of swordsmanship. After all, it was just a swordsmanship for health preservation in the ordinary martial arts world. He just wanted to refer to this mode of mobilizing inner chi to find a way to make mana more flexible. However, when Kui Heng used this method to activate his mana and swing the first sword move, his expression suddenly changed drastically. "Not good." The voice didn't fall Zheng. I just heard a sword cry trembling, resounding through the heavens and the earth like a crane chirping in the sky. At this moment, it seems that all the sounds of the universe are covered by this sword cry. A pure white sword light suddenly burst out from the long sword in Kui Heng's hand, as if it were a thunder light rising into the sky. In an instant, it penetrated the sky. Boom! Immediately afterwards, a deafening loud noise spread from the sky, as if thousands of thunders exploded at the same time, and as if the sky was furious, making the scalp numb. After more than 10 seconds, the sword light slowly dissipated. What was left were the white clouds that spread out layer by layer in the shape of a ring in the sky, and a deep ravine that was 3 or 4 kilometers long on the ground ahead. The soil and masonry were all overturned, as if they had been plowed apart. Zhang Kekai was stunned. Is this the swordsmanship that he has practiced for so many years? Kui Heng was also stunned. This Nima is the swordsmanship of the ordinary martial arts world? Mysterious high martial arts. The power of this sword is really outrageous, completely beyond Kui Heng's expectations. Originally I thought it was just a swordsmanship in the ordinary martial arts world. No matter how powerful it was, it couldn't be stronger than that, but I didn't expect it to be so perverted. A sword slashed through the clouds in the sky, and the aftermath cut a ravine on the ground that was more than 3 meters deep and 3 or 4 kilometers long. If it were put on the earth, it would be a little Superman. Kui Heng was inexplicably excited. This is the excitement of having a powerful power. Before that, although he had been cultivating immortals for 100 years and had reached the initial stage of foundation building, his physical and mental strength had surpassed that of ordinary people by many times, but he did not have the means to truly exert these powers. It's like sitting on a mountain of treasure, but he doesn't know how to spend it, which makes him have no idea of how much money he has. And now, with this sword being cut out, Kui Heng suddenly realized that his strength seemed to be okay. However, this feeling of excitement did not last long. He soon realized that the swordsmanship that allowed him to exert such a powerful force, it's just a kind of health-preserving swordsmanship from Zhang Kekai's world. Since he can cut out such a powerful sword light, it means that as long as people in that world have the same cultivation level as himself, they can cut out the same powerful sword light. This is definitely not a swordsmanship that can be found in the ordinary martial arts world. The ordinary martial arts world has no soil for such advanced swordsmanship. Moreover, this is just a swordsmanship for health preservation, not a swordsmanship that focuses on killing. If it were the swordsmanship created for killing, how powerful would it be? Kui Heng was amazed. This sudden power caused him a great sense of shock, which made him preconceived and determined that this was no ordinary martial arts swordsmanship. It should be some kind of fantasy martial arts with a very high ceiling. In this kind of world, if you can practice swordsmanship to the extreme, I'm afraid you can really cut down the sun, moon, and stars with a single blade of grass, turning the world upside down with a snap of your fingers. Kui Heng couldn't help feeling emotional. As expected of a high-level immortal space-time. No world is simple. First, the world of immortal cultivation like Hong Fugui, and then the fantasy world of high martial arts like Zhang Kekai. It is a place where the strong are like clouds and dangers are looming. Just now, I actually thought that it was just an ordinary martial arts world. It was a big mistake. Now, the joy and excitement in Kui Heng's heart has dissipated. Once again, he deeply felt the serious lack of his own strength. For such a fantasy world of high martial arts, what is the initial stage of foundation building? It must be like an ant. You must not float away just because you suddenly mastered a powerful force. Besides, the power of this sense of self is probably not worth mentioning in Zhang Kekai and Hong Fugui's world. And when Kui Heng was doing psychological construction for himself, Zhang Kekai's heart also set off a storm. The sword just now was like a miracle in her eyes. It was completely beyond her comprehension. Even beyond his comprehension. It's outrageous. Too strong. Can martial arts be so strong? This is the practice of martial arts to become an immortal. Otherwise, how could it be so strong? No, Brother Shenxian was originally a fairy, but in fact it should be Brother Shenxian who is very powerful. Turn corruption into magic. Let the ordinary health swordsmanship become such a heavenly swordsmanship. Zhang Kekai's gaze towards Kui Heng became more and more adoring. She has always had a dream, that is, to walk the rivers and lakes, the strong and help the weak, and become a real hero. And this requires strong enough martial arts. Brother Immortal. Zhang Kekai took a deep breath and bowed respectfully to Kui Heng. Please teach me the swordsmanship of the immortal family. Xianjia swordsmanship. Kui Heng couldn't help but be stunned when he heard the words, and then suddenly realized. It seems that this little girl doesn't know how powerful the swordsmanship she has cultivated is. She probably thinks that it is because of me who cut that sword that it has such exaggerated power. But in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that martial arts itself has such an upper limit of power, how could it be possible to exert such a powerful power? This set of swordsmanship itself is extraordinary. But it's normal. Judging from what Zhang Kekai said earlier, she has never been in contact with a master who has achieved great martial arts skills, so it is normal for her to have misunderstandings. Well, Xianjia swordsmanship. Zhang Kekai nodded extremely seriously, looking at Kui Heng with bright eyes. I want to roam the rivers and lakes, the strong and help the weak, and help those in need. Every word, like a stone falling to the ground, is decisive. Why do you have such an idea? Kui Heng asked without answering, a little curious. Unlike Hong Fuegui, who was born at the bottom of the world and suffered a lot, Zhang Kekai lives a good life. As long as he finds a good family, a husband and a son, he can spend the rest of his life with Mimi. Why do you think about roaming the rivers and lakes, hoeing the strong and helping the weak? After all, it is very dangerous to roam the arena in this fantasy and high martial world. Maybe one day it will be swept away by the aftermath of some sword light, and people will be gone. Because I'm a very lucky person. Zhang Kekai's voice was soft, as if caught in a memory. She smiled and said, I was very lucky since I was a child. I was born in a wealthy family. I have my parents and 6 brothers who dote on me. Although I have some illnesses, as long as I insist on taking medicine every day, there will be no serious problems. The doctor treats me very seriously. There is also a kind-hearted old Taoist who taught me swordsmanship to keep me in good health. After I came into contact with my family's business, my neighbors and many guests also took good care of me, which allowed me to make achievements and even get the title of a child prodigy. This made me understand that I am indeed a very lucky person. Many people have good intentions for me and will help me, but I have suffered this luck, but I have not done anything. It didn't help anyone. I've heard many legends about martial arts, in which they all say that heroes walk in all directions, hoeing the strong and helping the weak, but I have never seen such heroes, only martial artists bullying the weak. Sometimes I think, God has given me this luck, and everyone has given me so much help, should I accept it calmly? Can I go out, do something, help some people, and make others feel lucky too? Can I also walk the rivers and lakes, be a real hero who helps the weak, and change some things? However, in the past, these can only be thought about. I don't have a healthy body that can walk in all directions, and I don't have a strong martial arts that can the strong and help the weak. I can't do anything. But after all, I was lucky to meet you again, Brother Immortal. I want to learn the swordsmanship of the immortal family from you. Although this request may be a bit greedy, I haven't expressed my gratitude for you for curing my disease, and I make such a request. If you need anything, I will do my best to do it. That's it. Kui Heng smiled slightly. Actually, you have already given what I need. Ah! Zhang Kekai was stunned. Tomorrow morning, wait here. Kui Heng turned around, turned his back to Zhang Kekai, and walked towards the novice's hut. I will teach you a set of swordsmanship. When the voice fell, he had already walked into the house and disappeared. Zhang Kekai was stunned for a while, her eyes quickly filled with tears. She fell to her knees on the ground, and kowtowed respectfully. Brother Fairy, thank you. Actually, Kui Heng didn't think it was too much for Zhang Kekai to ask him to teach Xianjia swordsmanship. After all, this so-called Xianjia swordsmanship is essentially the health-preserving swordsmanship described by Zhang Kekai. It was because of this swordsmanship that he found a way to make his mana more flexible. This is the hope that can help him activate Daiji and make his cultivation realm further. It is no exaggeration to say that Zhang Kekai's health-preserving swordsmanship has enlightened Kui Heng. Without this swordsmanship, he might be able to break through to the middle stage of foundation establishment himself, but it might take decades, or even hundreds of years. This favor is definitely not light. Although Zhang Kekai didn't know this favor, it was impossible for Kui Heng to ignore it. Since the little girl wants to learn Xianjia swordsmanship, he will naturally try his best to figure out a set of qualified swordsmanship. For the immortal cultivators in the foundation building stage, mana has become a part of themselves and can be mobilized at will. Previously, Kui Heng just didn't know how to mobilize it to exert a strong power. Now that he has that health-preserving swordsmanship as a reference, he can infer all kinds of swordsmanships. It only took one day, and by dusk, he had deduced hundreds of different swordsmanships. Among them are not only the original martial arts, but also the swordsmanship that can be performed with flying swords. That novice flying sword could be activated as early as when he was at the 3rd level of Qi refining. But since he has never found a suitable sword fighting technique, he can only use the flying sword to chop randomly. At most it is used to chop down trees, and it is of little use. It will be different in the future. As soon as this swordsmanship came out, Kui Heng felt that he could easily kill hundreds of himself who didn't know how to use swordsmanship. For him, this is really a sublimation. So, for the next night, he was deducing a swordsmanship suitable for Zhang Kekai. Although the power of health-preserving swordsmanship itself is not low, the luck mind method seems to be somewhat incomplete, and only describes the meridian root of luck and the method of inner cultivation of the body and spirit. Sympathetic outside the world, there is no means of refining the vitality of the world to strengthen sword moves. For a complete high martial swordsmanship, this should be the most important part. Kui Heng discovered this problem before. If it weren't for the fact that his mana itself had the characteristic of mobilizing the vitality of the heavens and the earth, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to exert the true power of this swordsmanship. Now when I used this as a blueprint to deduce the swordsmanship suitable for Zhang Kekai, I thought of this again. Actually, this is not difficult to understand. Sympathetic out of the world, the means of refining the vitality of the world is the key to making this swordsmanship extraordinary. Without this part, health-preserving swordsmanship is really just health-preserving swordsmanship. Perhaps the old Taoist priest just wanted Zhang Kekai to use his swordsmanship to strengthen his body, so he did not teach this higher-level cultivation method. This is reasonable. And if you want to create a Xianjia swordsmanship, the part of the world outside the sympathy is the top priority. Most of Kui Heng's experience is in this area. When the sky was bright, he finally created a complete swordsmanship, suitable for Zhang Kekai to practice, and also suitable for his own practice. This is a method that combines martial arts swordsmanship and cultivator's swordsmanship. To use martial arts, this is the swordsmanship that can draw the power of heaven and earth. To use the swordsmanship to perform, it is the sword art of flying sword jumping pills, which differentiates the sword light. If you cultivate to the top, you will have a strength comparable to the foundation building stage. Once the sword is unsheathed, there will be thousands of feet of golden clouds in the sky, like a fairy light coming into the world. Named Xianjia Sword Art. Although this set of sword techniques can only be cultivated to a level comparable to the foundation building stage, this is not the limit. When she comes into contact with higher level martial arts, she can further optimize the sword techniques. And it is comparable to the level of the foundation establishment stage. In the world of immortal cultivation, it is already considered a character. Even in the world of high martial arts and fantasy, this level should be enough to get started. Kui Heng is very satisfied with his creation this time. The next morning, Zhang Kekai moved a small bench from somewhere, sitting in front of the novice cottage villa, with bubbles in his small mouth unconsciously. She was waiting for Kui Heng to come out. When the sun rises to the midair time and space, the door of the villa finally opens. Zhang Kikai's eyes suddenly lit up, and she jumped up with joy. Brother Fairy. She seems to be more lively than before. Sit here for a day and a night. Kui Hung looked around and asked in surprise, why didn't you go back to your room? I'm afraid you won't see me when you come out. Zhang Kikai smiled lightly, you said you wanted me to wait for you here in the morning. I don't want to miss a moment, let alone let you wait for me. You won't even eat rice, will you? Kui Hung couldn't help laughing and crying. Ah, this! Zhang Kikai suddenly looked like a child who had done something wrong, lowered his head, and defended in a low voice, although I haven't eaten, there will always be a warm current in my stomach, so that I won't feel it. Hungry, ah! As she was talking www.mtlnovel.com, she suddenly exclaimed, her face flushed slightly, and she looked at Kui Hung, Brother Fairy, that warm current is coming out again, running around in my stomach, it's so warm, or you can touch it. The little girl pointed to her belly, as if she wanted to prove that she was not lying. This is the spiritual energy left in the bowl of noodles you ate earlier, and it won't last long. Kui Hung ignored the ignorant behavior of the ignorant girl. Let's go, eat first, and then teach you swordsmanship. Wow, okay. Zhang Kikai nodded obediently and followed behind Kui Hung. Now that the little girl has been treated as an immortal brother, Kui Hung simply no longer worries about scaring her, so he calls out the yellow turban Lux and asks him to make 2 breakfasts. Naturally, Zhang Kikai's exclamations came again, and when the yellow turban master was cooking, it attracted all the little girl's attention. After all, such a guy with a height of more than 3 meters and a knot of muscles all over his body is really happy when he cooks a meal. After having breakfast, Kui Hung took Zhang Kikai to the quiet room where he usually practiced. Said to be a quiet room, in fact, the area exceeds 70 square meters. Very big. Enough to spread the body to teach swordsmanship. The sword technique I taught you is called Xiangxia sword art. As long as you practice carefully, you will have the opportunity to cut a sword that is no weaker than the one I swung yesterday. Kui Hung briefly introduced Xiangxia sword art, and said solemnly, this sword art is passed on to you, you are my only successor in your world, can you pass on this sword art, and can you remember and practice it? Do what you said before, help some people and change some things. I can. Brother Immortal. Zhang Kikai said decisively, with a firm gaze, I can.